other than vaccination was actually to move your body. But no one talked about that. Not once was there a public health message. I was the only person saying it, and then there were public health experts that never mentioned it.
Here's one. I was disappointed to find that at high school now there is no compulsory PE from year 11, i.e. fifth form.
Yeah, it's really sad, and particularly when we look at young women and young girls, their drop-off rate is astronomical. There are less than 7% of teenagers get enough physical activity, and that's going to be a major problem for not only the teenagers, but us as taxpayers moving forward in terms of the health cost of that. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of completely wasted money that we could be saving.
Always good to talk, Richard Berry, kia ora, and a little bit of Tina Turner going out, and Anna Dean and Peter Field. What a show. Wonderful stuff. Lovely to have you both on. I'm Wallace Chapman, and yes, it is Power Ballad Friday tomorrow. I'll see you sharp at 3:45. Stick around for Checkpoint.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere Aki nei, finally unmasked. The two brothers who drugged and raped victims at Christchurch bar Mama Hooch can now be named. Double murderer Mark Lundy is denied bail again. Calls to fund temporary accommodation for displaced flood victims. Early childhood centres claim they will pay the price for the government's expanded so-called free ECE policy. The Associate Education Minister is live. Period products are becoming a nice to have for some struggling families. And tone deaf or helpful money saving tips. The government energy campaign that sparked some backlash. You can watch us live on the RNZ website, Facebook and Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Ahi Madie, good afternoon. I'm Evie Ashton. A Canterbury police officer says it was disturbing to see how two brothers used Mama Hooch bar to drug and sexually assault people. Danny and Roberto Jazz lost name suppression today after being convicted in Christchurch District Court on a slew of charges, including rape, assault and drink spiking. Lead investigator, Detective Inspector Scott Anderson, says it became clear Danny Jazz intentionally used his role as a bar manager to commit horrific offending with his brother.
It just goes to show how premeditated they were in targeting vulnerable people, in particular young girls, to do what they wanted with.
Scott Anderson says everyone should have a right to go out and have a good time. Supporters of Mark Lundy have criticised the parole board's decision to keep the man twice convicted of murdering his wife and child in jail. They say it puts him in a catch-22 of potentially having to lie to secure his release. Jimmy Ellingham reports.
Lundy was declined parole today for the second time, having served almost 21 years for the year 2000 killings of his wife Christine and daughter Amber in Palmerston North. Lundy maintains his innocence, and the parole board convener, Sir Ron Young, told Lundy that was problematic when assessing his suitability for release. A group of Lundy supporters, known as Factual, has released a statement questioning the board's reasoning. Lawyer Julianne Kincaid, KC, also confirmed to RNZ that she was considering an appeal.
Wellington Police have released the name of the fourth victim of the Loafers Lodge hostel fire last week in Newtown. He was Kenneth Barnard, aged 67. His family have asked for privacy but say he was a kind, caring and patient man. A police officer says it would have required a lot of planning for John Beckenridge and his stepson Mike to flee a Southland clifftop if they staged their disappearance. John Beckenridge's four-wheel drive went off a cliff near Curio Bay 11 days after the pair vanished in March 2015, but their bodies were never found. At a coroner's court hearing in Christchurch, Sergeant Ian Martin was asked how easy it would have been for the Beckenridges to leave the area. He says it could possibly have been done at night. Preliminary investigations have begun after a diver was critically injured at Auckland's Half Moon Bay. Emma Stanford reports.
Police were called to the scene at 2:40 yesterday afternoon and the person was taken to hospital. Maritime New Zealand says it understands the person is still alive. It says due to the circumstances, an investigation could fall under the jurisdictions of them or WorkSafe, depending on how it occurred. The agencies expect to have a better understanding about who will lead a potential investigation by the end of the week. Fuller's 360 has confirmed they were not involved, and Sealink Ferry Company has been approached for comment.
One person in the Wellington region has died from meningococcal disease. It's the first case in the region this year and the third death since 2018. The Whatu Order won't provide further details. Cheaper houses have suffered the biggest price drops. QV says the bottom quarter of houses sold have seen their prices drop 15% compared with 12% drop for the top quarter. Operations manager James Wilson says strong demand from first home buyers has skewed the numbers.
First home buyers typically target that entry to mid-price stock. And so the net result of that is that lower quartile value trends downwards at a faster rate than the mid or upper price brackets.
Tributes have poured in for the late American Grammy Award-winning singer Tina Turner. She became famous in the late 1960s, performing as a duo with her abusive husband, Ike Turner. Martin Ware worked with Tina on her cover of Let's Stay Together in 1983. He says at the age of 40, the revival of her career was nothing short of miraculous.
The idea that she could go on to sell over 100 million albums after that point, multiple Grammy winning, was almost inconceivable.
Tina Turner was 83. In sport, the Crusaders' Super Rugby title defence has taken another hit with All Blacks prop Joe Moody ruled out for the remainder of the competition. Moody's had ankle surgery after being injured in the side's win over the Blues a fortnight ago. He'll be out for 8 weeks, which means he'll miss the rest of the Super Rugby campaign, but will be fit in time again for the All Blacks World Cup campaign in France in September. Moody's the fourth prop the Crusaders have lost to injury this season. Meanwhile, the Blues coach, Leon MacDonald, has confirmed first five Beauden Barrett will miss Saturday's game against the Hurricanes. Barrett has a heel injury and MacDonald says that has coincided with his mandatory All Blacks rest.
It was either this or next, so we were going to choose one of the two depending on how things were with other injuries, so it just forced our hand really.
The competition-leading Chiefs will rest All Blacks Tupou Vai and Anton Leonard-Brown for Saturday's game against the Brumbies. And Russian and Belarusian athletes will continue to be barred from competitions organised by Skiing's Global Federation, FIS, due to Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. The International Olympic Committee had recommended in March that athletes from Russia and Belarus be allowed to return to international competition as neutrals, provided they didn't support the war or weren't affiliated with the military. That's the news.
Trying to tame inflation.
It was really about a degree of confidence that we can put this inflation beast back in its cage.
Does the government's flagship early childhood education plan stack up?
The income does not meet the overall cost of providing quality early childhood.
And remembering the Queen of Rock and Roll.
There are so many artists who would not exist without what Tina did as a singer and as a performer on stage. It's a truly immense loss.
Simply the best. Morning Report weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. For Gisborne, any remaining light showers clearing this afternoon and becoming fine everywhere. For the remainder of the Ika Maui, the North Island, mostly fine. Areas of cloud tomorrow morning. Also tomorrow, expect isolated showers from Coromandel Peninsula northwards and about Taranaki and the Kapiti coast. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine today. Cloud increasing tomorrow. Rain developing about the Canterbury high country with isolated showers for Nelson. Looking at Bulla, fine at first. Cloud increasing this evening, bringing occasional showers. For Westland, showers turning to rain overnight. Heavy falls and squally thunderstorms south of Hokitika tomorrow. For Fiordland, rain heavy at times. Squally thunderstorms and hail from tomorrow morning till the evening. Otago and Southland mainly fine. A few showers about Dakiura, Stewart Island. Rain spreading north tomorrow afternoon, then easing to showers and clearing about Southland and Clutha tomorrow evening. And for Rekohu, Chatham Islands, cloudy weather. It's 7 minutes past 5. Our next traffic news and headlines are at 20 past 5.
Ngā mihi, Evie. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The two men convicted of rape, drugging and sexual assault at a Christchurch bar are brothers, and one of them ran the bar where they hunted for their victims. Danny Jazz was the manager of Mama Hooch, where he and his brother Roberto spiked the drinks of mostly young women. They would then commit rape, indecent assault and take videos while their victims were drugged. While being investigated by police, Danny Jazz blamed patrons for the crimes he and his brother were committing. Christchurch reporter Neva Chittick has more.
Detective Inspector Scott Anderson led the police investigation and says it was disturbing to see how the brothers used Danny Jazz's role as bar manager to drug and sexually assault victims.
One of their sole purposes was actually using the bar for their own gratification and servicing what they thought was quite all right for them, which obviously wasn't. I really hope that it is an isolated case, but it just goes to show how premeditated they were in targeting vulnerable people, and particularly young girls, to do what they wanted with.
When the allegations first surfaced in 2018, Danny Jazz told a stuffed reporter he would break the hands of those responsible. Detective Inspector Anderson says Mr. Jazz made those comments when he knew he was the offender.
It just goes to show that whether he was deflecting what was actually happening, because, you know, we saw at the trial he actually pled guilty to a number of sexual assault charges. So he knew all along when he made that comment that he had been sexually offending against these females.
The case has shocked the local hospitality sector, but Hospitality New Zealand's Chief Executive, Julie White, says it is an anomaly. In recent years, she says there's been a push to do more to provide a safe environment, especially as online dating grows in popularity.
Ask for Angela is an initiative that if you have met someone for the first time via a dating app and you don't feel comfortable, you go up to the bartender and you ask for Angela, and that's code to get me out of here or get me home.
Don't Guess the Yes is another campaign the organisation has launched with police in Wellington, Queenstown and now Auckland. Ms White says they want to see it rolled out nationally because everyone needs to stand united to stamp out inappropriate behaviours.
It is an issue. It just doesn't happen in hospitality venues. This can actually happen within the community. So this is a timely reminder for the rest of the police districts is maybe we should lean in together and make this a priority, because I certainly think that this could be an issue if it's left unsupervised.
Independent victim advocate Ruth Money has been supporting some of the victims in the Mama Hooch case. She says having name suppression lifted is a big deal, and the reaction from victims has been overwhelming relief.
People find their voice with the offender having their name unsuppressed because it moves that power. You know, sexual violence is all about power and control, and so for an offender to maintain anonymity means that this still sits in the shadows and the power sits with the offender.
Miss Money says now that Roberto and Danny Jazz's names are out, along with more details of the case, it's likely further victims may come forward as they piece things together.
Flashbacks and hindsight have started to bubble through, so we just encourage anybody who has got suspicions that something happened to them to approach police and go through that process.
Danny and Roberto Jazz are due to be sentenced on August 24th and 25th.
It is 11 minutes past 5. Kia amo tunu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Mark Lundy maintains he did not kill his wife Christine and 9-year-old daughter Amber in Palmerston North in 2000. But these denials did not go down well with the parole board today, as the twice convicted Lundy was again denied a release from prison after almost 21 years. Jimmy Ellingham watched the hearing and he joins us now. Kia ora, Jimmy. What was said about the fact that Mark Lundy maintains he's innocent?
Kia ora. Yeah, a lot of the hearing today focused on this issue. Mark Lundy said many times that he maintains that he did not kill Christine and Amber, but that was problematic for the parole board. They kind of said, well, we need to get an understanding of why you committed this offending, and we have to adopt this presumption that you are guilty. Mark Lundy said he understood that, but what could he say? He says he's innocent. He did not do this. What more could he say? He said quite a few times in answers to Sir Ron Young, who was the panel convener. Sir Ron Young put it to him pretty forcefully, though, that they needed a bit more than that, and even said things such as, what we have here is that you're convicted of a murder where there was a high degree of planning, and it seems probable that your daughter saw what was happening and that you killed her because she could have given evidence against you. This is Sir Ron to Lundy, revealing that you were the murderer, so you were prepared to sacrifice her life to ensure that you were not convicted. Sir Ron said it came down to discussions about this thing called a safety plan, and Sir Ron asked Lundy about this. What was the purpose of it? Normally it's for offenders to deal with the risks once they're released from prison, the risks behind their offending. Lundy, when he was asked, said it was a document that would stop him getting back into prison. And Sir Ron said, well, that's not quite what these things are for. So there's a lot of discussion about this, and those Lundy maintaining his innocence kept coming up time and time again. And Sir Ron said, we really need some insight as to why you offended. Lundy said, I didn't.
And so what did his lawyer have to say?
His lawyer said he was a good candidate for parole. She described Lundy as a model prisoner. He'd had no misconducts in prison, no history of violence before these murders as well, which she said was quite rare for people coming before the parole board. She said he was on bail from 2013 to 2015 and complied well. That was after he was released when the Privy Council quashed his conviction from the first trial and the head of the second trial in 2015. And psychologists had found him a low risk of reoffending.
And what sort of discussion was there about what Mark Lundy will do when he eventually does get out of jail?
Well, some of that centred on Palmerston North. We can't say where it's proposed that he's released to, but he was asked if he wanted to come to Palmerston North, and he said a guided release with permission from his probation officer to visit the grave of his wife and daughter who are buried in Palmerston North. But he said while he has friends here, he has no need to come to Palmerston North at all. There was also some talk about work. He said he's developed a passion for working with timber, but he said realistically probably can't get full-time employment. He had some medical problems that we can't actually discuss. Those are suppressed. He also expressed doubt that employers would perhaps want to employ him given his notoriety. So he's 64. He's eligible for the pension later this year anyway.
And he had supporters there. They were obviously disappointed in the decision. What did they have to say?
He had two supporters there. We're not allowed to say who they were, but a group of Lundy supporters known as Factual has released a statement disagreeing quite vehemently with the parole board's decision. It said, effectively, Lundy's in a catch-22 situation where he'd have to lie to say he was guilty to be considered for parole, which he's not prepared to do. Lundy's lawyer, Julianne Kincaid, has also said that she's considering an appeal against the parole board decision.
Thank you, Jimmy. That's our reporter, Jimmy Ellingham, who was at the parole board hearing today for Mark Lundy, denied release. Promised a Ferrari but delivered a lemon. That's the verdict of early childhood leaders on the government's flagship budget policy, extending 23 hours of ECE to 2-year-olds. The group that represents 3/4 of ECE providers says it's unworkable and could have unintended consequences, including pushing up fees and forcing centres to shut up shop altogether. The Associate Minister of Education, Jo Luxton, who's overseeing the policy, is welcoming the opportunity to sit down with the group soon, and she joins us now. Kia ora, Minister.
Kia ora.
So you're happy to sit down with them. Why didn't you consult with the industry before you came up with the policy?
As is with normal budget announcements, it's not normal procedure to sit down and discuss things that are coming out of the budget with different groups. It's usually held quite closely to the chest of government until it's announced on budget day.
Couldn't you have talked to them in broad brushstrokes about what would work and what wouldn't?
Well, I think that it's just part of the process when it's a budget process, and as I say, things are always kept tight to the chest of the government until budget day.
So what, announce it and patch it up later?
No, I don't think it's a matter of patching up. I'm not going to shy away from the fact that this is the largest, it's a record investment in early childhood that we've made, the largest we've seen in many, many years, and this is going to mean so much to so many families whose children will be able to go to early childhood centres at the age of 2 for free.
But will they? That is the point, because these ECE providers say it is unworkable, that many may opt out of the system. It could lead to raised fees and some places could close. So what is your response to that criticism?
We had similar criticisms when we announced 23 hours back in 2007, and so I don't see that it would be any different now. It was opt-in then, it's opt-in now, and this will also be opt-in.
Yeah, but they say the goalposts have changed, right? So the providers say, first off, let's work through some of their criticism, that the government subsidy or payment isn't enough for the service that you are expecting them to provide. So to be clear, Minister, how much does the government payment cover?
When I had my own early childhood centre until recently, so I understand what it takes to own and run and operate an early childhood centre. I allowed children to enrol simply for 23 hours, and I never had any issue with doing that.
Yeah, but this is 3/4 of providers, so that's great that you had your childcare centre. This is 3/4 of providers, and they have raised that criticism. So could you address that? How much of the fee does the government pay, and how much is left for ECE centres to cover?
So the way the funding is set up at the moment is not to cover all 100% costs of early childhood centres. It is a certain amount of funding that goes towards funding the operational costs of centres.
So what percentage? Can you give me a percentage? Do you know what percentage it does cover?
No, sorry, Lisa, I don't have that on me.
Isn't that something you should have looked at before extending the scheme in this way?
We will have the figures somewhere, but like I said, I've just stepped off a plane and I just don't have those figures on me.
Okay, so the Kindy Network says they're getting funding of between $7 and $9.84 an hour when they're having to pay teachers anywhere up to $90,000. So that doesn't sound like the maths adds up, does it?
Well, this budget has just seen an increase of $322 million go into early childhood centres in order for them to be able to pay their teachers what they are worth.
Again, they say it doesn't cover the costs. So your funding is at a ratio of 1 teacher to 10 kids, the highest possible ratio, and above what most centres say they currently do. So are you asking them to compromise safety and quality in order to provide this free or subsidised service as they see it?
Absolutely not, and I don't see that it has to do one or the other. I think that this is a workable solution. This is going to put up to $133 a week into the hands of parents of children attending early childhood centres. We are addressing a cost of living crisis by ensuring that there is more money in the pockets of families at the end of the day.
So you are prepared to revise the policy, are you, given that you're going to sit down with them and they're not happy with it?
Look, I think I'm really looking forward to sitting down and having a conversation with them about the issues that they've raised. Absolutely.
Appreciate your time. That is the Associate Education Minister, Jo Luxton there. 20 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. All for Karo. Really interested in your feedback on that one. The government call it free ECE, 20 hours, extended to 2-year-olds. The childcare centres say it doesn't really cover the costs and they're left, well, paying for something that is supposed to be free. It could lead to some closures, they reckon. Let us know your thoughts. Minister couldn't tell us what percentage that fee does pay. 2101 on text. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time for us to go to the headlines now. Ko iwi anō tēnei.
Kia ora, Lisa. The police officer who led the investigation into the Mama Hooch sexual assault cases says the offenders were using the bar for their own gratification. Brothers Danny and Roberto Jazz had their name suppression lifted today after being convicted on charges of sexual assault and drink spiking. Detective Inspector Scott Anderson told RNZ's Neva Chittick for Checkpoint that the brothers' behaviour showed how premeditated their actions were. He labelled the level of offending as horrific. A lawyer is considering an appeal for double murderer Mark Lundy after he was denied parole earlier today. It's the second time Lundy has had parole denied following his conviction for the murder of his wife and daughter in 2000. Supporters of Lundy have also criticised the decision to keep him in prison. Public health officials are warning people to look out for the symptoms of meningococcal disease after the death of a person in the Wellington region. The Medical Officer of Health for the Public Health Service, Dr Craig Thornley, says early symptoms include a fever with cold hands and feet, vomiting and muscle aches. Officials are still trying to work out who has jurisdiction over an investigation into how a diver was critically injured at Auckland's Half Moon Bay yesterday. The diver is in hospital and preliminary investigations have begun. And a 67-year-old man, Kenneth Barnard, is the fourth confirmed victim of the fatal Loafers Lodge hostel in Wellington last week. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in northwest Auckland, just north of Kaukapakapa on State Highway 16. There are some delays northbound near the intersection of Kanohi Road because of a broken down truck. A serious crash at Ohingaiti on State Highway 1 earlier today in the central North Island means the road is still under stop-go management there. And in the South Island, a slip on State Highway 6 between Belgrove and Kohatsu will close the road from 5:30 tonight in about 7 minutes. Our next traffic news and headlines are at 5:40.
Ngā mihi, Evie. An experienced all-white has made a substantial financial donation to help close the gap between the resourcing of men's and women's football. Marco Rojas donated $20,000 to his former A-League club, Melbourne Victory. The first time a private donation has been made to the club's community programs. The 31-year-old's generosity will fund a range of women's football initiatives, and we're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. So what has spurred this donation?
So Marco Rojas went to the Melbourne Victory in 2012. He left the Wellington Phoenix to go there, and he's had 3 stints at the club over the last decade. He's played in Europe and he's currently playing in South America with Colo-Colo. But it was during that last stint with Melbourne Victory, which ended last year, where he really started to notice the difference between the men's and women's programs. They're quite closely connected, the Victory men and the Victory women. They have a lot of the same training areas and changing rooms and things like that. So they're quite closely linked. And it was during that period that he started to notice that the elite men and the elite women were getting completely different things. He was also saying that as part of this, this Victory women's team is quite successful. They have won 3 A-League titles. So it wasn't like that they weren't getting value, I guess, from what they were getting, but he was saying that a lot more could be done, and he was hoping that a lot more could be done. So he's given this donation, and he says he wants it to go to kind of the behind-the-scenes things, the support for the women playing and also for their coaching staff. He wants it to go to some of the things that he says maybe they're missing and that they don't have, so that they could, if they could get it, would help them during pre-season or even during the season. And Melbourne Victory's also got a connection to the Afghan women's team who got asylum in Australia in 2021. So he's hoping some of that money will also go to support those women as well. And it's part of, I guess, as well, the greater, we've been kicking it around for a while, the equality debate between the men's and women's in football. And I was speaking with football fan Hannah Wilkinson this week. She plays for the crosstown rivals, Melbourne City, and I sort of said to her at that point as well, is there equality between your 2 A-League teams? And she stopped short of saying yes. She said, that's the goal. And she says the Players Association works really well in terms of making sure that there is a bit more of a level playing field. But if we see people like Rojas and his donation, maybe this will open the eyes of some other players or people with a bit of money to throw towards these women's competitions as well.
It's kind of really interesting because we're obviously having the debate here in New Zealand as well, and some conflict over whether the women's teams are funded equally. It's also interesting that you're relying on private donors for equality. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so in a similar vein, netball is facing a massive challenge as it tries to compete with codes that are being cross-subsidised by cashed-up men's sports.
Yeah, so at one stage, netball would have been the first choice for women. Now they're getting a lot more options. Female athletes, sort of, even this week, we've been talking about the options that they've had to go from rugby to league. So it's the rugbies, the leagues, the crickets, the basketballs, all of these sports which are throwing a bit more money towards these women's programs as they see the need to boost them. And because they've got the money to do so, because they're male-dominated sports, so they've brought in the money over time and now have it to put towards a women's program. Whereas obviously netball's on the back foot there, so it's the women that generate the money for their sport and the men are the ones that have less, I guess, directed towards them. So the New Zealand Netball Players Association's Steph Bond Bond said over the next 6 months it's actually going to be quite crucial for netball. It's a time when they're trying to get a new employment agreement over the line. She doesn't say whether that's actually going to mean more money for these women, but because they're going to be competing with the likes of cricket, which is the IPL. They are the highest paid female athletes in New Zealand. So they've got more opportunities to go get some more money, which these netballers don't necessarily have because of the tournaments which are available to them currently. They're also looking at putting netball free to air. So there's a broadcast deal which needs to be negotiated before the end of next year. It's one of these favourite things that the sports people like to throw around is you can't be what you can't see, which is a very overworked term. But I guess if they're looking at it in this way, if they're putting it on free to air, it is encouraging more younger people or people who don't have access to pay TV to still consider netball as an option for them, even when female athletes have such a broader option of sports available to them.
Yeah, interesting discussion. Hey, thank you, Felicity. Felicity Reid there, sports reporter. Auckland Action Against Poverty believes a government campaign urging struggling households to find money in weird places is disrespectful and smacks of privilege. The joint campaign with consumer and energy groups provides advice on power savings that Minister Megan Woods says could save families up to $500 on their annual power bills. Things like operating a heat pump efficiently, shortening showers and changing washing cycles to cold, and switching appliances off when not in use. We asked some people on the street what they think of the campaign.
It's advice we already know. It's a little bit condescending.
I think that's a really feeble advice for a much bigger issue. That's not really a solution. It makes it look like the consumers are the problem. I think it's a policy problem, not a consumer problem.
I think it's absolutely ridiculous. Okay, limit showers if you feel you need to, but I'm not a fan, to be honest.
I think they're doing it in the right tone and they're putting it out there for people to take on board, so might have been things they haven't thought about, so yeah, no problem with them giving advice, especially with the cost of living getting increased, especially a young baby on board, 4-month-old. Any help we can get is greatly appreciated, I suppose.
No, I think it's a pretty good point. It's like a pretty good incentive to save money, especially for like individuals. Like everyone can do that, everyone can save the money.
The blame is kind of being shifted onto them as opposed to the broader issues that are happening.
It's kind of a slap in the face really when the government is spending this, the budget is bigger than ever, they're bringing in more tax money than ever, and they're still telling people to literally to not do like the most basic things.
And joining us now is Auckland Action Against Poverty Coordinator Brooke Post-Stanley. Tēnā koe, Brooke.
Tēnā koe.
What are your thoughts on this campaign?
I think my initial thoughts aren't appropriate for radio, but I think it reflects the lack of connection to communities. I mean, people and families are doing their best to navigate how much it costs to live right now by actually foregoing using electricity, food, power, petrol, rent, juggling these things every day. And for many of the people that we work with day to day, and it's really just another business as usual day in a colonial capitalist house.
So, is it fair to say that you were angered when you saw this? Is that the polite way of putting it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a euphemistic way of putting it, I think. But I just feel frustrated. Poverty is a systemic issue and it requires collaborative systemic solutions. And I think it doesn't recognise that people are already doing so many of these things and beyond to ensure that they have enough money for the other things that are essential in their lives.
Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing with the people that you help and advocate for.
I mean, I think this has been going on for a long time, even before this cost of living hit many more of us. But we see people all the time having to juggle their bills, coming in and requiring extra support from work and income, and just doing their best. I think we also, on top of that, we see a lot of resilience from the communities. We see a lot of community organisations having to step in to do the extra work to hold communities together because of the lack of support from central government. And so it is tough. It's really tough for people and families and communities right now. And the people that are actually having to hold our communities together are community organisations. And I just want to shout out all the people on the ground that are doing this work.
The issue that some people would raise, and the Prime Minister has said this himself, that there's always energy-saving campaigns around this type of the year. So this is not new. So in your mind, what makes this different? Is it about timing?
I think it just speaks like as I mentioned earlier, read the room. Like, where inflation is at its highest, people are having to access food banks more regularly. People there, where we have the highest amounts of people accessing the accommodation supplement. Petrol is high. Everything is literally going up, and benefits aren't going up, and neither are wages. And then we have a campaign from the government that shifts the blame of the systemic issues, actually, and solutions that they can provide for our communities back onto people and families and communities. And I just think they talk about, having to tighten their budgets, likening their budgets to household budgets. Okay, well, if you're going to, it's not actually like that at all. But if you want to play that, then also look after people like a family then. And this isn't, none of these things, this campaign, and even within their term, have looked to support that idea of that they should be looking after people as a family.
Brooke, we're almost out of time, but what the Prime Minister said today is he said, I think they've got their tone a bit off in terms of the campaign. In a sentence, what would be your message to him?
It's not good enough. I mean, I think you can offer so many more solutions. We can look at making services free in our communities so that people don't have to forego things like using electricity. We should look at making sure that actually electricity should be free, like food, power, petrol, should, those things we should look at making free so that communities don't have to rely on where they're at to be well. And the government has all the levers to be able to do that.
Thank you for your time, Brooke. Appreciate it. That's Brooke Poe-Stanley, who is from Auckland Action Against Poverty, the coordinator there. Let's get to some of your feedback now. A lot of you getting in touch about ECE. This was kind of the flagship policy in the government's budget announcement, extending the 20 hours free, as they say, to 2-year-olds. Logan's got in touch to say, if it's part of the process to keep budget policies without consultation with affected sectors, then the process needs to change. Don't defend poor planning in organisation. My 5-year-old, who got good early childhood education, could do better. And this in from Anna. One of the reasons that the ECE private sector are not happy is that they are in that sector for profits. Children aren't a business, they are our future. Another person says private companies concerned only with their profits. Why don't you query the complaints? Who has ever heard of an early childhood teacher getting 90k? Well, under the pay parity rules or adjustments, they would be receiving between 55 and 90 odd thousand in a salary. Excuse me. The Queen of Rock and Roll, Tina Turner, has died at the age of 83. Turner rose to stardom from humble beginnings to become one of the most popular female singers of all times. She also survived an abusive marriage by fleeing her hotel room with just 36 cents in her pocket. Tributes have been rolling in throughout the day from celebrities, fellow musicians and politicians from around the world. Known for her husky and powerful vocals and energetic stage performances, she won 8 Grammy Awards and was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2021. CNN's Stephanie Elam looks back on her life.
Proud Mary was one of Tina Turner's signatures, showcasing her unique sound, look, and moves.
That's my style. I take great songs and turn them into rock and roll songs on stage.
Icon, survivor, a queen of rock and roll. Tina Turner began life as Anna Mae Bullock in rural Tennessee. As a teenager, she moved to St. Louis, where she met rocker Ike Turner.
Ike was very good to me when I first started my career. Started to sing weekends with him, and we were really close friends.
The Ike and Tina Turner Revue's first hit came in 1960 with A Fool in Love, a song they performed on Shindig. They married in 1962, and in 1966 recorded River Deep, Mountain High. It was a hit overseas, but flopped in the U.S. Offstage, Ike's drug abuse fueled violent outbursts.
I had had a lot of violence. Houses burned, cars shot into, like, the lowest that you can think of in terms of violence.
After years of physical and emotional abuse, Tina left Ike in the mid-70s with nothing but her name. At one point, relying on food stamps to survive. In the early 80s, Turner's cover of Let's Stay Together reignited her career. Private Dancer followed in 1984, a runaway critical and commercial success. The album featured her only #1 song. Though she wasn't a fan.
I didn't like it. I wasn't accustomed to singing those kind of songs.
It was also the title of a 1993 film starring Angela Bassett, based on Tina's autobiography.
Did the picture do it justice?
Yes, I think in a way I would have liked for them to have had more truth, but according to Disney, it's impossible that people would not have believed the truth.
Turner herself appeared in movies such as The Who's Tommy and Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. She sang its theme song. As well as the theme to the James Bond film, GoldenEye. One major role she turned down would go to Oprah Winfrey in The Color Purple.
It was too close to my personal life. I had just left such a life, and it was too soon to be reminded of.
The What's Love Got to Do With It soundtrack gave Turner another hit. Her personal favorite?
It was very special because at the time when I got it, no one believed in it but me.
Turner continued recording and touring into her 80s. She was honored by the Kennedy Center in 2005 and inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a solo act in 2021, 30 years after her first induction as part of a duo with Ike Turner. All the while, her Buddhist faith kept her going.
The calls you make this lifetime can be the effect of a better life the next lifetime. It will be better and gets better and better.
A remarkable career. It is 19 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tonu mai, you're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's time for the business news now. Ko taku hoa inai ko Nona Peltier, who joins me in the studio. Main Freight delivered another strong result, but says demand for global freight is slowing. And what did it make?
Well, it made a 20% gain in their net profit to $426.5 million, which sounds pretty hefty, doesn't it?
It's chunky.
It's pretty chunky, but the first half of their financial year was very strong. The second half wasn't anywhere near as strong, however, still, I think their third best half ever. However, they said that definitely there was a swift drop in pricing for freight, air and sea freight. And then, remarkably, there was a huge drop in volume. I did have some numbers here. Like total air freight volumes by kilo fell 8%. So that's quite significant. That was in the year just past. Customer clearances down 3, total sea freight down 7. So that kind of upset the market a little bit when they heard the result, because Main Freight didn't provide a guidance and thought that the rest of this financial year was going to be pretty tough. So their share price dropped 3.3% today. And that's one of the really big companies on our market, certainly that affected the NZX Top 50 index to some extent, which would have otherwise had a pretty good day. So, yeah, Main Freight, I think one of the things I did ask Don Braid about, who's the managing director, was concern that we're still hearing from industries about supply chain constraints. He said it isn't in the freight divisions. If freight's your issue, give them a call. Otherwise, he says it could be that there's still a lot of issues around manufacturing. China's just really still getting back on its feet. There's a lot of issues around inventory. So a lot of companies that stocked up on extra inventory during the supply chain constraints still haven't cleared that. So that's another warning for the company. So it didn't provide a guidance, and that was, I guess, the main reason why the market really didn't love the result.
Okay. Let's talk about the amount of debt being carried by households. It is on the rise. What are the latest numbers you have?
Right. So yesterday we had the Reserve Bank's official cash rate announcement with the monetary policy. And today the governor and his assistant fronted up to the Select Committee on Finance and basically well, I guess probably one of the things that was dropped then was how were households taking on and managing through debt? And the assistant governor, Silk, said, well, at the moment, debt as a percentage of household disposable income, so that's after you pay your household costs, what's left over, 16% of your whatever's left over is going for debt today. But by the end of the year, that number is expected to rise to 22%. So
almost a quarter.
Yeah. And that's a lot for some families. Disposable income, if your debt is cutting, taking that much of your disposable income, that's money you're not spending on any kind of extras, right? Or saving, of course, yeah. Disposable income is something that a lot of people don't have a lot of to begin with. And with inflation and so forth, it's really cutting into their lifestyles, I'd say.
And what numbers do you bring from the market, please, Nona?
So again, the top 50 index, it ended down 12 points to 11,960. And the Kiwi dropped another half a percentage point today. That was yesterday. We had the Reserve Bank's official cash rate. The dollar fell just over 1%. Today it was down another 0.5% to 60.8 US cents, 93.2 Australian, and 49.3 pence. Now, there's still a lot of pressure on the Kiwi as well because of the uncertainty over what's going on with the US debt crisis and what that could do to interest rates in the United States. So that's putting pressure on our Kiwi as well. So we'll see what happens. Once that's resolved, perhaps the decks will be cleared and we'll have a better idea of what's coming forward.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite. Nona Peltier there with Business News. It is 17 minutes away from 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keep sending us your feedback. We love to hear from you. Homai or whakaaro. Don't forget you can text us on 2101. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to go to Evie in the headlines now. Ko Evie anō tēnei.
Ora Lisa. The Associate Minister of Education says she rejects claims that early childhood centres could be forced to compromise safety and quality under the extension of the 20 hours free childcare to 2-year-olds. Early childhood centres claim the subsidy could force them to put fees up or close altogether. But Jo Luxton told Checkpoint she thought the subsidy was a workable solution and shouldn't be an either-or choice for centres. An anti-poverty action group says a government education campaign on how to save money on household bills shows how much it's lost touch with the community. Opinions have been mixed, with people labelling the campaign as either condescending, feeble, ridiculous and blaming consumers, or a good way to teach people how to save money. Auckland Action Against Poverty Coordinator Brooke Powell-Stanley told Checkpoint poverty was a systemic problem and needed an holistic approach to solving it. A sexual assault advocate says that having name suppression lifted in the Mama Hooch case has created overwhelming relief for some of the victims. Ruth Money told RNZ's Neva Chittick that lifting name suppression removed the offender's power over the victims and gave them confidence to speak out. And houses at the lower end of the market have lost more value than those at the top because of the absence of investors. QV Operations Manager James Wilson says its latest quartile index figures show there is strong demand from first home buyers who target the cheaper end of the market. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic now, there are some delays north of Kaukapakapa in Auckland on State Highway 16 because of a truck breakdown. Further south on State Highway 1 at Ohingaiti. A serious crash earlier today means the road is still under stop-go management there in the central North Island. And in Tasman, a slip on State Highway 6 between Belgrove and Kohatu has now closed the road until late tomorrow afternoon. Southbound traffic can detour via Waiti Valley Road, Stock and Valley Roads. Reverse for northbound traffic. I presume they mean those roads in reverse order are your detour, not that you have to reverse away from the slip. At least that's what I'm hoping. Our next news and weather are at 6.
Me too. I hope that as well, Evie. Thank you. The freight and logistics industry is facing a workforce crisis with a new report estimating it could be 18,000 workers short over the next 5 years. The report for the Manufacturing, Engineering and Logistics Workforce Development Council shows the industry's been hemorrhaging staff to offshore employers over the last 2 years. Almost a quarter of its workers aged under 25 headed to higher paid jobs overseas. Well, joining us now is the Director of Sorted Logistics, Chris Webster. Kia ora.
Kia ora, how are you this evening?
I'm very good, thank you. How bad do you reckon this is for the industry?
Look, it's a real challenge, and it's been a challenge for some time, and until some changes are made, it's going to keep being a challenge. And what you've identified by workers heading off overseas is real.
Okay, we'll get to some of the solutions, but I'm just wondering, for you, you operate out of 2 main centres, don't you, Christchurch and Auckland. I mean, how many staff could you do with extra?
Yeah, so we're roughly looking, we could employ another 30 people tomorrow, and we've got full-time staff just constantly in the recruitment space. So let's say we've got 300 staff nationally, we run a casual pool of around 40 staff, and we'd have any day between 30 and 40 temporary staff as well, and we could easily take on another 30 today.
So why can't you get them?
Oh, look, there's all sorts of challenges. A good example, there's just not the people out there. Obviously, it's fantastic for New Zealand. Unemployment stats are 2.7, 2.9%, something like that, in a high level, which is fantastic. But there's just not the people out there that are coming forward in those jobs. It's really, really tight to attract them.
So what kind of jobs are you talking about, and what sort of money?
Yeah, look, the biggest one for us is store people. In the truck driver space, we're in a good place at the moment, but in the store people space, so our target market or the demographic of that space is 17 to 22, 23-year-olds.
And so what do they do? And is it unskilled, and are they getting unskilled pay as well?
No, look, we pay well above minimum wage, and then we've got some really good programs in place to develop those people and upskill them. And we're trying to, like the casual pool that we've got about 40 people in, that's targeted at university students and school leavers and school people looking for work after school as well. So like, let's say you want a Tuesday and a Thursday shift between 3:30 p.m. and 9 p.m. We've got those shifts available. So we're trying to attract all those people, school holidays, especially in that Christmas time, around that December right through to January as well.
So, Chris, is there longevity in this work, and is there progression? What's the top of the ladder that you could get to?
Yeah, cool. Really good question. So we run our own. So we've got our own classrooms. We've got a classroom based in Auckland. We've got a classroom based in Christchurch, and we run what you call a sorted pathways program. So as you come on as a store person, we call that a white belt, and then as they progress up to there, they go to an orange belt. And then we go to a senior store person, which is a black belt, and then we go one up from that to a warehouse supervisor, which we call as a sensei. So we've got a really good pathway program that we progress and teach people and train people.
And what do you get at the top of the heap, Chris? Because people will be wondering.
Well, as in there's a pay scale.
Yeah, what's the salary?
What's the money?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like if you're up at sensei level, you could be at that $33 an hour. And then the starting wage in Christchurch would probably be around that 25 to 26 an hour, in Auckland around that $26 to $27 an hour, so well above the minimum wage.
Okay, so then there must be some other issues at play, and the report did identify one thing, which said that there is racism is an issue in the industry. Pacifica people are expected to do more for less money, and there's discrimination against women. How much of a problem do you reckon that is in the industry?
Yeah, look, I can't talk about the industry as a whole, but what I can assure you of is that businesses that have clear pathways and clear pay scales for that, and we run really good diversity statistics, and we're about 40% female, 60% male, which we're really, really proud of. And from a Pacifica race and India race and all that sort of stuff, there's obviously no barriers. And one of our courses that we actually run is cultural communication. And a really good example of that is obviously we've got some Filipinos and some Indians, and we've got Australians working for us as well. But a really good example in India, it's very, very religious. And there's different provinces in India, and you have to communicate differently in those provinces. So what we do is one of our courses that we run is cultural communication, and that's for all staff, and that's understanding how to talk to people and understanding different cultures and what is those right buttons and how to treat people and stuff like that as well. So
Appreciate your time, Chris. Thank you for that. That's Chris Webster, who's the Director of Sorted Logistics there. It is 8 minutes away from 6. The Coroner's Court has heard 11-year-old Mike Beckenridge's name was written on items of clothing that washed up in Southland following the disappearance of the boy and his stepfather 8 years ago. Police who examined the scene where John Beckenridge's car plunged off a Curio Bay cliff top also found 2 sticks lashed together like a marker near the edge. Gina Edwards reports.
The court heard members of the public found items washing ashore in Porpoise Bay just over a week after Mike and John Beckenridge disappeared in March 2015. Detective Dougal Henderson told the court police officers had to act fast to collect them.
It was, in my mind, critical that we secure them before we lost them to the tide. I knew the tide was coming in or almost in, so it was going to start retreating. And we didn't want to run the risk of losing any vital evidence that might help identify where Mike and John were.
Mr Henderson says Mike's name was written on the tags of a pair of shorts, a grey school shirt and a T-shirt recovered from the sea. A laminated card with his name and contact details was also found. Up on the cliff top, police found a set of tyre marks and 2 sticks lashed together near the edge like a marker. Mr Henderson says it's hard to see where the cliff drops off from further back in the paddock.
You'd need to have something up close or have a marker to say this is what I need to line up with to have the best trajectory, I guess, for the want of where someone may want to put a vehicle over that cliff.
But private investigator Mark Templeman questioned Dougal Henderson about another theory.
Would you also accept that it's also possibly used to indicate where someone could jump from the vehicle?
Well, that's something I hadn't turned my mind to.
Well, I'm asking you to now.
I'm unsure from the evidence I've given how close that stick is to the edge now in metres. So, I'm unsure.
Counsel for Police, Deirdre Elsmore, says the stick could have directed the car to land in the sea.
It's one inference that can be drawn that if you start close to the marker, then you would land in the sea rather than on an outcrop of the cliff.
Mark Templeman told Coroner Marcus Elliott the marker could have had a dual purpose.
To indicate where they should point the vehicle, but also where to exit the vehicle.
Mike Beckenridge's mother believes the disappearance was staged and her son is still alive. The court heard there wasn't any evidence of human remains in the wreckage of the car. Sergeant Ian Martin was asked how easy it would have been for the Beckenridges to leave the area, given the terrain and the number of people searching for them.
It could be done maybe at night if there was enough planning put into it, maybe, but it is a large area. There's a lot of roads that would make it difficult to track, I suppose.
Police witnesses couldn't recall a specific search for the Beckenridges after the tyre marks were found, with the assumption they were alive. The hearing continues.
The country's largest period charity says demand is at an all-time high as sanitary products become a nice-to-have for struggling families. 2 years ago, the government funded period products in all state schools, but the issue stretches far further than the classroom. Reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Nick Monroe have the story.
How many, probably $20,000, $30,000 worth going in?
The cost of a period is an expensive one to bear.
It's hard enough just trying to pay for food and gas, and then you want, especially people our age, and food and everything's just getting more expensive, and it's actually horrible. It's actually so horrible. It should just be a given. We all have to deal with it, so why not?
I usually just go to the cheapest place, but that's hard to find, especially in the supermarkets.
I spend upwards of $20 a month on period products, and at least I can afford that, but I know a lot of other people can't, and it's really unfair for a lot of other people that they can't get basic rights. And it's not like we can control when it happens, so, everyone should be entitled to free pads.
The latest Kids Can survey from 2018 found over 20% of people had missed school or work due to a lack of sanitary items. 1 in 3 people said they had to prioritise other items like food over sanitary products. Over half of people said they had used toilet paper. Others said they had used old cloths or even disposable nappies.
And so people just come in if they want to, they ask, they talk, and we just give them what we have.
Over the last 5 years, the Period Place in Onehunga has been working to deliver products around the country to more than 100 partners, including local iwi, marae, food banks and churches. Co-founder Danica Revel is busy loading up some reusable products today for a delivery to a local youth charity. They also provide education to eliminate any stigma or taboo about menstruation and have a store where people can access what they need free of charge. Over the last year, demand has skyrocketed, with over 150 places on their wait list. Danica says while part of the demand is a good sign people know where to get support, the cost of living is a huge factor.
Unfortunately, period products are the first thing that go off the shopping list. You can't eat a tampon.
While the government's rollout of products in state schools 2 years ago has been met with great feedback, she says it still leaves many off the list.
We've still got a long way to go. So what I want to see is every bathroom outside the home have access to disposable period products, just like toilet paper. When you go out to work, you don't grab your hand dryer under one arm and your giant roll of toilet paper under your other arm, and you don't tattoo out, put them in your car and go off to work.
Their team is still small, doing deliveries themselves, with tampons and pads loaded up in Danica's car. Today they're heading out to Upside Youth Mentoring in Green Lane. They buddy children aged 9 to 13 up with a mentor and meet once a week. CEO Jenny Horse says period poverty is a huge problem for their kids.
There's one young girl that comes to mind, and her mum's a meth addict. She has been in the position where she's been raising her younger siblings. For her, she was having to not only go to school as like a 13-year-old, but also hold down a job to try to pay for groceries to feed her siblings. So for her, things like caring for herself was, one of the last things on the priority list.
She says being able to provide period products has been life-changing.
It's enabling these young girls that I'm talking about, that we're mentoring, to be able to go to school and not stay home on those days.
And if you were listening to that story from Louise on radio, do check out the video version filmed by Nick Monroe. It'll be on our webpage. Lots of feedback coming in on the energy saving campaign by the government. The Prime Minister says, maybe they got their tone a bit wrong. Some of you agree with that, some not so much. This person says how ridiculous the campaign they're talking about. Our power bill has more than doubled since Minister Woods okayed the nixing of low user pricing last year. Unkind and stupid move, says Sam. Another person, though, says high prices aren't the government's fault. And this listener says there's nothing wrong with giving sensible suggestions to possibly wasteful people, environmentally friendly too. And another says New Zealand is becoming the land of the whinging, led by the opposition and supported by groups like Action Station. Tips to save power are optional.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Ngā mihi o te pō. Good evening. Ko Evie Ashton tēnei. An independent victim advocate says some women in the Mama Hooch case are overwhelmingly relieved their attackers can be named. Brothers Danny and Roberto Jazz were convicted on a series of sexual assault and drink spiking charges in Christchurch District Court last month. Danny Jazz was Mama Hooch's bar manager. Advocate Ruth Money has been supporting some of the victims through the lengthy court process and says power is now with the survivors.
People find their voice with the offender having their name unsuppressed because it moves that power. Sexual violence is all about power and control, and so for an offender to maintain anonymity means that this still sits in the shadows.
Ruth Money says the naming of Danny and Roberto Jazz may also see more victims come forward as they piece things together. Supporters of Mark Lundy have criticised the parole board's decision to keep the man twice convicted of murdering his wife and child in jail. They say it puts him in a catch-22 of potentially having to lie to secure his release. Lundy was declined parole today for the second time, having served almost 21 years for the 2000 killings of his wife Christine and daughter Amber in Palmerston North. Lundy maintains his innocence, and parole board convener Sir Ron Young told Lundy that was problematic when assessing his suitability for release. A group of Lundy supporters, known as Factual, has released a statement questioning the board's reasoning. Lawyer Julie Ann Kincaid Casey also confirmed to RNZ that she was considering an appeal. The Associate Minister of Education says that she'll meet with early childhood centres after a backlash against the government's subsidy plans. Last week's budget extends 20 free hours of early childhood education to 2-year-olds. But a group that represents 3/4 of ECE providers says that's unworkable and could have unintended consequences, including pushing up fees or forcing closures. Associate Minister Joe Luxton says it's workable because practices can choose if they take up the scheme, but it's not the first time the policy has been criticised.
We had similar criticisms when we announced 23 hours back in 2007, and so I don't see that it would be any different now. It was opt-in then, it's opt-in now, and this will also be opt-in.
Joe Luxton says she'll meet with the early childhood group to hear them out. The highest court in the country has decided it will hear the case of a teen sex offender who's continuing to bid for name suppression. The young man, who pleaded guilty to sexually offending 6 people when he was aged between 14 and 17, had been sentenced to 12 months home detention. He earlier failed to get permanent name suppression in the District Court, the High Court and the Court of Appeal. Today, the Supreme Court released its decision to hear his appeal. 3 Supreme Court justices say the appeal raises questions of public importance on how youth justice principles, rehabilitation and risks of publication intersect with the principles of open justice. 2 men have been arrested in Waikato in relation to the supply of methamphetamine. Police searched 2 properties in Huntly this morning and found 2 guns, ammunition, cannabis and cash. Both firearms were unsecured inside the houses, including one where young children live. The men, aged 40 and 42, are facing charges including drug and firearms offences. In the US, the Republican governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, will seek the Republican nomination for next year's US presidential elections. The BBC's David Willis reports on a Twitter launch plagued with technical issues.
After overcoming a series of glitches on the Twitter Spaces audio feed, Ron DeSantis told an audience of millions that it was time to restore sanity to the United States by imposing tougher immigration policies and clamping down on crime. In what will be seen as a dig at his one-time mentor and now arch-rival Donald Trump, the Florida governor also said that it was time to end the Republican Party's culture of losing. Posting on his own Truth social media site, Mr. Trump said Twitter was the perfect platform for Ron DeSantis to announce his candidacy, since he didn't have to interact with people and the media weren't able to question him.
Allies of former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson say he is seriously considering legal action against the government over new claims of COVID lockdown breaches. He's been referred to the police over potential rule breaking at Downing Street and the then Prime Minister's country residence, Chequers. But Conservative Minister Alex Boogart says there's no attempt to deliberately target the former Prime Minister.
This absolutely wasn't politically motivated at all. You know, there's, as I understand it, there was a sift of documents being done for the COVID inquiry, and during that sift, some things came to light, and it was the responsibility under the Civil Service Code, it was the responsibility of the people who found them to hand them over to the authorities. You know, the authorities are going to look into it.
Mr. Johnson denies wrongdoing and claims a political vendetta. Tugboats have refloated a large ship that had earlier been stranded in the Suez Canal, allowing flows through one of the world's busiest waterways to return to normal. In 2021, a huge container ship became jammed in the canal, halting traffic for 6 days and disrupting global trade. And wildlife officials in Cameroon are struggling against a herd of marauding elephants that have wandered into the capital, Yaoundé, this week. The animals have trampled through surrounding villages, killing at least 2 people. The elephants are searching for water as droughts are happening more often with climate change. That's the news.
elegant, refined, sophisticated. At First Up, our highly skilled writers use only the finest seasonal words and phrases to craft articles for the discerning ear. Elevate your listening experience when you rise early with First Up. Fresh every weekday from 5 a.m. on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, partly cloudy, isolated light showers in the east. For the remainder of the Ika Maui, the North Island, mostly fine. Areas of cloud tomorrow morning, also tomorrow. Expect isolated showers about Taranaki and from Horowhenua to Wellington. Nelson and Marlborough, fine today. Cloud increasing and isolated showers developing tomorrow. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, mainly fine, although showers about Dakiura, Stewart Island, scattered rain developing tomorrow morning, becoming widespread across Southland and Otago tomorrow afternoon, easing to showers and clearing about Southland and Clutha tomorrow evening. Severe gale northwesterlies developing, possibly gusting to 130 kilometres an hour. Fine at first for Bulla, cloud increasing this evening, bringing occasional showers. Looking at Westland, showers turning to rain overnight, heavy falls and squally thunderstorms south of Hokitika tomorrow. For Fiordland, rain heavy at times. Squally thunderstorms and hail from tomorrow morning until the evening. And for Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. The time is coming up to 8 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora rā e ho, no mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. National and ACT could govern alone according to the latest One News Kantar public poll. National has taken the lead again and is on 37% in the poll, ahead of Labour on 35%. ACT is on 11% and the Greens have fallen to 7%. In the preferred Prime Minister stakes, Chris Hipkins has taken a hit but is still in the lead on 25%. Christopher Luxon trails behind on 18%. Now, our Deputy Political Editor Craig McCulloch joins us now. Well, there's really only one thing to say. Game on, eh, Craig?
Yes, good evening, Lisa. This poll was conducted from Saturday through to Wednesday, so right in the middle of that whole budget mop-up. It delivers a National ACT standalone government on these numbers. 47 MPs for National, 15 for ACT. That is 62 MPs. That is enough to go it alone. Labour, the Greens, Te Pāti Māori, between them, they can only make 58 MPs, and that's not enough, as is often the case with MMP elections. This is still a very tight result, but like I said, National ACT, they can do it on this.
What should we read into the polling time frame, which began, as you point out, after the budget? Is this dissatisfaction with what was revealed?
Yes, no budget bump there for Labour. In fact, they have slipped slightly down to 35%. I think they will be more concerned actually by National's rise up 3 and back in the lead, and the fact that these numbers leave the left with no pathway there to power. Even with Te Pāti Māori, they can't do it. Now, for a bit of context, contrary to popular opinion, there are not usually, or lately anyway, there have not been budget bumps in the polls. They have been the exception, not the norm. Going back to 2015, the only year that there was a budget bump was in 2020, and I suspect that had a little bit more to do with what was going on with a wee pandemic. So a slip here is not particularly unusual. I suspect that the result actually has a little bit more to do with the general disarray that there has been on the left lately, the sacking of Stuart Nash, Mika Whaitiri jumping ship. The public seem to have taken a dim view of that discord.
Yeah, but they have only gone down 1 point, Labour, whereas the Greens have had a significant drop, right? So what would you say about that?
Yes, a 4-point drop for the Greens. Worth noting that the previous poll had them quite high on 11. This result drops them back down into an area that we've been seeing in some of the other polls. The Greens seem to have, and we've seen this throughout this term and actually last, they seem to have baked in a certain level of support that seemed to have stuck with them throughout the hard times. But that resignation of Elizabeth Kirikiri, that won't have helped them. The internal ructions within their membership being exposed. The co-leaders do have a lot of work on their hands to mend those hurt feelings and to lift that vote back up again, because Labour needs them.
So in terms of the preferred Prime Minister stakes, Chris Hipkins, 25%, still well ahead, but down 2 points. And the other interesting thing, Christopher Luxon, up 1 to 18 again.
Yes, One of the key stories of this year has been Christopher Luxon's struggle when it comes to his personal popularity, his lagging personal polling, his struggle to cut through to voters. He took a 5-point hit in this poll between February and March. So these latest numbers are a little bit more of a slight bounce back. They're not stellar for him, but at least now he is moving in the right direction. It's the opposite story for Chris Hipkins, who might be worrying that new job appeal is starting to wear off.
Yeah, so the weight of politics and even the weight of something else on him, Craig?
Yes, apparently an admission that he's put on 5 kilograms since taking on the new job, all those sausage rolls perhaps, or maybe the stress of the job and the stress of looking at some of these numbers.
Yeah, and the other thing, just while I've got you, so there was a News Hub, I think theirs is a Reid Research poll, isn't it, a little earlier this month, May 14th. And what we're sort of seeing is that the numbers aren't too far apart. Who's going to be happy with this?
Well, on this, the right-wing party's definitely going to be take some comfort from this result. The News Hub results had them in a bit more of a precarious situation. They couldn't form a government there. So what we're really seeing, the big picture that's coming out of all the polls of this year, it's going to be tight. It's a razor-tight election, and there is everything to play for. Both sides need to keep bringing their A game.
And what does this mean when we consider New Zealand First's position in Winston Peters?
Well,
given the fact that the left cannot form a government with the numbers that they have got, with Te Pāti Māori, Labour and the Greens.
New Zealand First, they're coming in here at 3%. Not a bad result this far out from the election, but has to be said, still a fair way from that 5% threshold. So if they don't make it back, they are an irrelevancy. The more it closes that gap, though, the more attention it will get and the more likely it could build a bit of momentum close as the election comes a bit closer. Winston Peters has ruled out, though, working with Labour. So at the moment, the only possibility there is for him to work with National. National would love a situation where it could play New Zealand First and act off against one another, ultimately going with one, but not having to give them everything that they're asking for because they have options. That's still a long way in the future, though. New Zealand First still only on 3%. Can't get in on that number.
Thank you for that, Craig. Good to talk to you. It's interesting times. Craig McCulloch, our Deputy Political Editor there, live from Parliament. A call tonight for the government to pay accommodation costs for people displaced from flood-damaged homes as their insurance payments run dry and they remain in limbo. The advocacy group West Aucklanders Flooding wants a fund people can apply to cover the cost of their temporary accommodation as they wait for authorities to decide about managed retreat. Well, joining us now is WAIF spokesperson Morgan Allen. Kia ora, Morgan. It's getting heading towards 5 months people may have been out of their homes. What are the realities they're facing in terms of costs?
Kia ora, Lisa. Thanks for having me on to talk to this evening. Yeah, the future is pretty grim at the moment, unless there's some real decisive action quite quickly from the government and I guess in partnership with the council. People have a very limited amount of funds available from their insurer to cover temporary accommodation. And we're in quite a unique situation at the moment because normally if somebody's house burned down or there was some event, a tornado hit your house or something, you wouldn't wait 4 months before you would start rebuilding. You would look to settle your claim as quickly as possible, take your money from your insurer and get on with it. But what we've got here is a state where, like you said, we're 4 or 5 months on and none of that work has started yet. So there's a real pressure there.
What are people paying for temporary accommodation if they can even find it?
Well, it varies, and obviously, people have got to weigh up different needs with pets and kids and travelling for work and school. I think after the anniversary floods and the cyclone earlier this year, there was a real rush for people just to get whatever they could find, really. So there's situations where some people have had to stretch themselves further than they would want to because there was such a critical need to find housing so quickly. So yeah, there's quite a range of scenarios. Some families have had to split into different parts. We've got kids not living in the same homes as their parents. People maybe overstaying their welcome in some situations in ad hoc environments. So yeah, there's quite a mix there.
Morgan, make your case for the government paying for this, because they would argue, I'm assuming, that this will create a precedent, and they don't do this in all cases where people are kind of in limbo. So why should they pay?
Well, I think the main thing to highlight here is the reason that people haven't been able to carry on with the normal process that would happen after a natural disaster is because we're lacking that clarity from government, and they've indicated that they're going to respond, and they've indicated that in some instances people aren't going to rebuild their homes. So you have to ask the question, does it make sense for people to take the funds they're going to get from their insurer to rebuild their property if in 3 to 6 months' time they're just going to move out anyway? It doesn't make sense. So that's the real key difference here, is that there's a liability on the government with the time frame they're working on to really work with people to give them the best outcome.
On that point, the Prime Minister has indicated that the first red zone decisions were made 9 months after the initial 2010 earthquake, right? So 9 months. Can you wait that long? Can you hang on until October for a decision, financially and mentally?
Many people can't. Many people realistically, have 5 to 6 months tops before they're in a situation where they're paying for a mortgage and their rental accommodation. And with rising interest rates, that's becoming an increasingly untenable position. So this is why we are putting the call out and trying to support those in our community, because this is a real looming social disaster that we see coming.
So what do you mean when you say social disaster? Are you talking about people bankrupt and homeless? I mean, what are you saying here?
Yeah, people having to default on their mortgages, people having nowhere to live, people not being able to afford, just their basic human rights. And it's a situation that nobody wants, because, even if people do default on their mortgages, a lot of these properties are so severely damaged that even for the bank, there's not really much value there that they can salvage. So there's not really a lot of options if we don't get something on the table soon.
So this call for support, you have sent it to a number of politicians. Has anyone said, yep, I'll take that case up for you?
We've had some responses. The Housing Minister, Megan Woods, did respond through the media today, and they made comments around that we have the Temporary Accommodation Service in place, TAS, and that is the government's primary way of supporting people in this instance. But the issue there is that TAS really only gives people a 10% discount off the market rate for the area that they're living in, which really, a 10% discount when you're still having to pay rent and a mortgage simultaneously, it's not really a solution. It's I wouldn't even call it an olive branch. So that's the only official response really we've had.
Thank you for your time, Morgan. That's Morgan Allen, who's from the advocacy group West Auckland is Flooding. Interested in your thoughts on that one, 2101, or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. They want the government to set up a fund that will cover temporary accommodation until such time as the government makes decisions on whether to red zone some of the properties, i.e. say it's time to retreat from that area. The New Zealand music industry is taking flight after years of pandemic cancellations, closed borders and venues closing down. Local artists are having their first big tours since the pandemic began and releasing new music. Crystal Gibbons reports.
COVID brought the live music scene to its knees. But while the border was closed, promoter Brent Eccles says local acts had a unique opportunity to flourish, while international acts couldn't come here.
We had the playing field to ourselves for a while, if you could actually tour. But there was a time there where the internationals weren't coming, we had it to ourselves, we did quite well.
And even though international acts are now flooding back, Eccles says locals are still holding their own. Many are also taking the opportunity to tour overseas. As more and more, he says, New Zealand artists are seeking a worldwide stage. LAB is one band that's testing out whether their popularity will extend overseas. So far, they've been a hit. From the 3 shows they've done in the States so far, the band has already been invited to play some festivals next year. Lead singer Joel Shadbolt says playing for an American audience is a different experience.
It's funny playing in the air here, because no one knows it. We're so used to 20,000 people just losing their minds
when that song drops. But it's really humbling, to have that experience. It's like, yeah, sweet. Challenge accepted,
Keyboardist Mihado Gregory has also enjoyed the challenge of playing for a new audience.
As it's our first time over here, kind of can play whatever we want. We're playing just all the hits and experimenting with a couple songs that we're planning on writing, or are writing. We're in the studio a week after we get back from the States, so it's cool seeing the crowd react to the songs differently than what they might at home, and which songs kind of are favourites over here.
Meanwhile, the Vales are returning to their UK stomping ground after 4 years away. Frontman Finn Andrews moved back to New Zealand in 2019, and now he's back touring overseas for the first time since the pandemic. The Vales have also recently released a new double album.
It's amazing to be here now and to be going back to these cities in Europe that we haven't been able to play in for so long, that have sort of become places of fantasy, especially while I was making the record, sort of imagining getting to play these songs again in these venues that we've played to 30, 40 times over the years.
Kaylee Bell, however, headed back to New Zealand to reset after years of living in Australia and a stint on The Voice. She's now storming her way up the country on her first headline tour.
It's been amazing to get out and actually finally, play our own headline shows and to meet people and just have so many kids at the show. It's been quite amazing to see the response to country music in New Zealand, and just the way people are connecting to the live thing, and the energy, I think, has been really quite incredible.
While on the road, Belle's been testing out a new song or two from her new album, which will be out in September, but her wings are spreading too, and after her national tour, she's moving straight to Nashville.
It is 23 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. To the US now, where it wasn't the campaign launch that Florida's governor had hoped for. Ron DeSantis' much anticipated entry into the race for the Republican presidential nomination was beset with technical problems. ABC's correspondent Barbara Miller reports.
It was to have been a win-win for Elon Musk and Ron DeSantis, a chance for the Twitter CEO to showcase his Twitter Spaces function, and for Florida's governor to finally launch his 2024 presidential bid. Instead, it soon descended into what felt like a bad Zoom meeting.
We're just trying to get it going because there's so many people.
At one point, the feed went down totally. Ron DeSantis did finally get his chance to tell the audience why he'd make a great president. Much of his pitch based on the stance he took during the pandemic, keeping schools and churches open while other states shuttered them up.
Well, when COVID hit, I had to make decisions about, do you go with the crowd or do you look at the data yourself and cut against the grain? And I chose to do the latter. I faced huge blowback for doing that from the bureaucracy, from elites, from the media.
The 44-year-old stance on COVID played a big part in his landslide re-election last November. He's also banned the teaching of gender identity in schools, a move dubbed the Don't Say Gay bill by its critics, embroiled himself in a bitter fight with the state's largest private employer, Disney, and recently signed into law an abortion ban after 6 weeks of pregnancy. The father of three calls his brand of politics the war on woke. And in a subsequent interview on Fox News, he made it clear if he ever makes it to the White House, he'll be continuing with it.
As president, I'm going to make sure woke ideology ends up in the dustbin of history.
In the Fox News interview, Mr. DeSantis tried to make light of the earlier technical troubles.
It did break the Twitter space, and so we're really excited with the enthusiasm.
That interview and the publication of his first campaign video went well.
Our border is a disaster. Crime infests our cities. The federal government makes it harder for families to make ends meet.
But social media users weren't keen to move on quite so quickly, with the play on his name, #disaster, soon trending. And Donald Trump was having a field day on his social media platform, pointing out that it was still working and calling his challenger Rob DeSanctimonious. Republican strategist John Feary says Ron DeSantis will have to walk a fine line in taking on Trump, but not getting sucked into the former president's game.
The fewer times he spends
in the mud pit with Trump, the better off he's going to be. So he's got to figure out a way to kind of define his own campaign, define himself, and then figure out a way to connect with the voters in a way that is not playing Donald Trump, and because no one plays Donald Trump's game better than Donald Trump.
The ill-fated Twitter Spaces event ended on this note from moderator David Sachs.
Well, thanks, Governor. And yeah, we have over 300,000 people in the room. It's really been pretty incredible. And, we started with some technical issues because of the sheer scale and unprecedented nature of what we were doing. But It's not how you start, it's how you finish. And I think this finished really strong. So
a message of hope Ron DeSantis will also be holding on to as he now tries to narrow Donald Trump's substantial lead.
A 40-year-old Dutch man who was paralysed in a cycling accident 12 years ago is now able to walk again thanks to electronic implants in his brain. The implants transmit his thoughts to his legs and feet via a second implant on his spine. The development, published in the journal Nature, is still at an experimental stage, but already it's changed the man's life. Here's the BBC's Palab Ghosh. And we'll just find that audio from that story. I think we've got it. No. OK, let's do a little bit of feedback while we sort ourselves.
People who have a spinal injury are often unable to walk because the signals from the brain can't get to the leg muscles when the nerves in between have been damaged. But a Swiss team has short-circuited the injured area by placing 2 implants on a 40-year-old Dutch patient's brain, which transmit his thoughts to a third implant in his lower back. Gertjan Oskam told me it's transformed his life.
Standing in the bar and having a beer, that's a new possibility for me now. Instead of sitting next to my friends on the standing table, I'm now joining standing. People don't realize it, that it's been a long time goal for me to stand up and have a beer with my friends, and it took me 10 years to reach that point. The beer tastes very good at that point.
Gertjan can only use a system for only an hour or so each day because it's tiring and the equipment is bulky. The research is still at an experimental stage and it's several years away from being available in the clinic. But Professor Jocelyn Bloch of Lausanne University said that it was an important step forward.
He shows us that it's possible to do it. It's not anymore science fiction, but it's reality. And it means that other people in the future will be able to get it too. So at this stage, it's a little bit early because it's the first technology and we had to do the proof of concept. But then the idea is to have the possibility to develop a device that will be available for everybody.
The researchers believe they can make further progress in the years to come. In the meantime, Gertjan can look forward to having a beer with his friends more often.
Pretty amazing technology. Last word today goes to this listener who's got in touch about the cost of living story that means some people are struggling to pay for period products. They say the company where I work provides period products and all the ladies in a nice basket. We have awesome HR. Thanks for getting in touch. The Late News team will keep you updated throughout the evening. And don't forget, if you missed anything on the program, you can always find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcast from. Ko te kaupapa tuatahia pōpō. And tomorrow from 5 a.m. on First Up, the Wanaka woman crushed by a falling balcony at a 660 concert, now going for gold on the ski slopes. That is an amazing story. Tune in at 5 a.m. for that one. Kia pai tōpō. Have a wonderful evening and I'll catch you again tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening, I'm Evie Ashton. The latest One News Kantar poll shows that National and ACT could form the next government with a combined 48% of support. A victim's advocate suspects that more women may come forward now that 2 brothers convicted in the Mama Hooch sexual assaults case have had their name suppression lifted. The Privacy Commissioner is releasing his expectations for organisations' use of AI technology, ensuring that express consent is granted. And the Reserve Bank Governor is confident inflation will soon start to track downwards. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
This Saturday morning, are we too economically dependent on China? Is it friend?